Welcome. Thank you so much for coming today. We are San Diego Green Drinks. We are a group of environmentalists who meet once a month in various locations and since the beginning of March, virtually in our own homes to discuss environmental related topics. This month, we're centering the ways that environmentalism and social issues are related with Jorge González from the Environmental Health Coalition. My name is Kelia Cowan, and I'm one of the volunteers here today. We have a number of volunteers. They're all of our co-hosts. If you want to raise your hands real quick and say hi, you can help direct, or if you have any questions, need any help, feel free to direct it their way. So before we hop into this discussion, I want to mention a few notes. We're testing out a new format this month to continue to foster our community connections. So this means that we're now doing a meeting format instead of a webinar. We really ask for your patience and openness as we adjust to this new format. I wanted to take a moment to recognize that the world has changed immensely since we last met in May. We've been reminded of too many injustices that pervade our country, our community, and our lives. As a community-based volunteer group, San Diego Green Drinks has decided that these issues have always been important. We need to be more active in the way that we advocate and center groups and individuals who have been fighting for justice. By being bystanders in this fight would mean that we're complicit in these wrongs. So in our ongoing effort to be more inclusive and find new ways to bring in more diverse voices to our community, we will be learning and growing. We hope that this virtual format makes our events in some ways more accessible for our audience, recognizing that we're spread across a fairly large geographic region. But we're also really welcoming your feedback as we continue to improve. We know that we will be imperfect in these efforts, and we are committed to listening, growing, and evolving. I want to take a moment to thank you so much for showing up today to be a part of this learning and growing experience. So now you may be asking, what will this look like in practice? While I certainly don't have all the answers, I do want to acknowledge that I've been fortunate to be a part of this Green Drinks community and be a part of the environmental movement because of the privilege that I have. This movement has always had a problem where its members don't necessarily reflect the full diversity of our communities. And in order to be a better movement, we'll need to be more intentional about the ways that we welcome more voices and adjust our efforts to be more inclusive. This will look different for each of us, but I submit to you a few ideas on how we can begin to foster more intersectional environmental advocacy. It may look like things like taking the time to recognize past wrongs and relearning how they've shaped today's systems. It may look like reckoning with the past, not to erase it, but to be accountable for our origins, as the Sierra Club is now doing. It may be the pursuit of difficult conversations and getting familiar with the idea of being uncomfortable. It also means recognizing that even though we do call this group San Diego Green Drinks, we sit on stolen lands. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that I am on the traditional territory of the Kumeyaay, and San Diego is home to more reservations than any other county in the US, and we do need to work harder to center the knowledge and connection of Indigenous peoples to the land that we occupy. Last, our community is stronger with more diverse voices, and we will be more effective in our pursuit of fighting climate change and preserving our natural environments when we are a collective of folks who represent the inhabitants of our world. Though not a single solution to the problems we face, I do hope that tonight's conversation will be a place for you to start thinking about the ways that social issues are environmental issues and make you feel that empowered that we can, in fact, make a difference here. To make sure we have a common starting point, I wanted to discuss a few definitions that you'll hear tonight, or discuss a few definitions of terms that you'll hear tonight. So with environmental justice, which is the topic we'll be discussing today, I thought UHC has a great definition. It's the right of every single person to have access to a clean and safe environment and a safe living space. Environmental justice communities are the communities where environmental justice is not a given. They're impacted disproportionately by exposure to environmental harms and are more vulnerable to the effects of these hazards. We'll hear a bit more today about examples in San Diego. Environmental racism is the existing institutional activities that, intentional or not, make people of color and/or low-income individuals more exposed to environmental hazards. You'll see this if you're, for example, looking at a map of the location of different energy generation facilities. They're often in communities where the individuals are lower income or people of color. With racial justice, we need every single person to have equitable opportunities and outcomes. I think that speaks for itself. And last but not least, intersectionality. To me, this removes the issues that we're talking about here from their individual silos and recognizes that causes we care about are not separate from the rest of the world, but rather part of a complex and interrelated ecosystem. Intersectionality looks at these problems through a layered prism, so the collective movements can join forces to fight for equity for all. And as my slides got ahead of me there, that brings us to our speaker tonight. So we're super excited to welcome Jorge González to the floor today. He is the Regional Community and Civic Engagement Organizer for the Environmental Health Coalition, which will be celebrating its 40th anniversary next month. We're really excited to hear from this individual and this group who have done so much to fight for the right to cleaner, safer communities. So welcome. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you guys again for inviting me, Green Drinks, and the whole team and volunteer team that's behind this. Really appreciate the invite. I put together a presentation today. I know we have limited time, and to cover 40 years is just impossible. So we'll try to go through this as fast as I can, but definitely highlight and bring insight to some of the important key historical moments at EAC and give you a sense of who we are and what we do at the Environmental Health Coalition. Well, we couldn't talk about environmental justice and not recognize that the zip code of anybody in these communities is a predictor of health, and all communities and zip codes are not created equal, as Dr. Robert Bullard mentioned. This is true in our communities. I'm native from San Diego, grew up in Chula Vista, San Isidro, and then I did my BA in UC Davis and then my MA at UC Santa Barbara. So I've had the chance to step out of these communities and come back, so to gain more perspective. And prior to doing environmental justice, I was doing criminal justice and immigration justice work, looking at immigration reform and both criminal justice reform. So environmental justice for me, what really impressed me or called me was the fact that it really brings an interdisciplinary lens into the work. It's easy to define, but easily to understand. It's harder to understand its complexities when you're thinking about the layers that impact and the intersectionalities of environmental justice. So hopefully today we'll talk about who is EAC, what is it that we do at the with environmental justice in San Diego. I'll cover a little bit about what is it environmental racism looks for us here in the city and the county of San Diego. I'll talk about some of the work we're doing related to air pollution and land use policy. And ultimately, I want to share with you guys some of the work that we're doing with regards to these EJ communities south of the 8 freeway that have been predominantly impacted for the past, you could say, easily 60, 80 years, if not further than that. So EAC has a long history, and a lot of people might not know this, that we really started as an organization looking at health disparities specifically related to cancer. So in the 1980s, the organization was started by our today executive director, Diane Tech-Borian, who continues to be the executive director and the founder. And since then, since the 80s, and there's a lot of work that has been done, a lot of accomplishments and a lot of challenges that we began to really trace and link the relationship between serious health effects and the chemicals used in homes and workplaces and the surrounding environment of where these communities live. Well, our mission is very simple. It's really, we believe that in order to fulfill justice in these communities, we need to empower communities by acting together to create social change. And that sometimes comes with resources, that comes with advocacy in order for us to create a better health and a better environment in these communities overall to remove toxic contamination. So it's, it's been said already, Kelly said this, already, this is pretty simple, but I would add to this definition, environmental justice is the right of all people of color and communities south of the 8 to live, work, and play in a clean and safe environment. I know there's other communities that are dealing with the same challenges in Escondido, some in Vista, which are like rooted in old community land use infrastructure and policies that have been it's structurally and intentionally in place to keep the status quo as it is today. So what is it that we do at EAC? Yes, we are turning 40 years, and I'll talk about our main event happening on August 20th, which we are all invited as of now. So I'll share with you more about that towards the end. So at EAC, we manage multiple campaigns. There is a team of about 30 of us approximately. We have research directors, policy advocates. It's a big team, and we work on different issues, different campaigns such as climate justice that has been mainly focused in climate and the climate action plan that got adopted here in the city of San Diego, transportation justice, toxic free neighborhoods, which it's very centered and focused in land use and more currently in air monitoring through a recent bill that got passed at the state level, which I'm going to talk about. And then clean ports, which we really oversee, and we're like the watchdogs of what's happening at the port. As some of you know, some of the tenants there are big, huge, heavy industry companies that import and export the goods movements, right? So we have NASCO, one of the biggest tenants there, fabricating some of the largest boats in the entire Pacific, repairing and building, right? And one of the main business partner there is the Navy, of course. So then we do Healthy Hits. Healthy Kids, it's another campaign that I've been a part of myself. Actually, I've been a part of almost all of them, directly or indirectly. And with Healthy Kids, one of my experiences there was doing healthy home visits. So we get to visit families who have been impacted either by the lead in the house paint, that sometimes families don't know the impact that causes to kids and adults as well. And also more recently, we've been looking at air quality inside people's home and how that triggers asthma attacks and heart attacks as well. And of course, as you saw in my job title, I'm also the lead on the voter empowerment campaign. So we get our communities, out to vote. We're changing that culture, right? That needs to happen. And right now, we're actually managing our census campaign as well. So we're doing voting and census as of now. And then, of course, the lead campaign, which is I already mentioned, and then border environmental justice. We're one of the only organizations, I believe, as of today, or it might have not been the case in the past 5 years, but last I checked, doing binational work across the border on environmental justice. So a lot of the work we do here eventually translates into Mexico and translates into Tijuana, working in a specific community there called Chilpancingo. This is a quick map of what it looks like. We do work in City Heights, Barrio Logan, Sherman Heights, National City, and Colonial Chilpancingo. And the community profiles here, it's very straightforward. We're talking about a lot of the families we work with live in poverty, are also renters, and that is really a direct correlation with the history of redlining in our communities. This is an old map of San Diego where you see the red zone is essentially a marker of where housing eventually was really based on families who lived in low-income housing or lived in very deteriorated housing, and so the home loans that were being available at the time were very specific to the neighborhoods that we were talking. You're looking at here in this map, and that really eventually impacted where marginalized communities of color lived. Barrio Logan, for instance, was a predominantly Italian, was also Black and Latino, and we're mainly working in canneries. As you probably know, the bay and the harbor was mainly tuna packing industry. So was Little Italy, for those of you who didn't know, was Italian, Black, and Mexican, right? So that's why you see that red. It looks here more purple than red, but you get the point. So environmental racism for us is really, discriminatory policies and activities of government, corporations, and education institutions, or other powerful entities that either intentionally or unintentionally result in people of color or low-income people being exposed to greater environmental hazards. I think the biggest news you probably heard in the past couple of weeks was the Navy ship going on fire in these portside communities. And it was, of course, through a weekend heat wave. People didn't have the luxury of closing their doors or windows. Neither did they have an AC system or an HVAC system that could filter out these toxic high particulate matter, PBM 2.5. So these are ultrafine particulate matter. It's in the air. The amount of these red dots that you see here are emitting toxic, either light or heavy industries that have to borrow or apply for the air permits in order to pollute in our communities. And as you see disproportionately here, where is the concentration of these, right? And all this relates to land use, and many at times, when it comes to a direct rule, it relates to specific land uses that are sometimes next to each other. So within a block of a residential area, you could have a heavy industry, light industry mixed with a senior housing, mixed with another heavy industry next to it. That's allowed in Barrio, Logan, for instance. That has one of the oldest outdated community plans. So disproportionately here, you can see the concentration of toxic substances in communities because of these outdated community plans, and also because of policy. You know, San Diego recently just adopted a climate action plan that hasn't really reflected, hasn't been necessarily implemented the way we were hoping to see. So this continues to be the case. This was probably done in 2016 when we crunched in these numbers. And I'm sure La Jolla, when we talk about those 3 million pounds, half of them would probably be gasoline stations that store gas, right? So when we talk about toxic substances, we talk about, you know, Praxair, you know, these heavy industrial businesses that operate in front of residential areas that are essentially, they're a ticking time bomb. You know, all it takes is a human mistake for them to go on fire. And these communities are impacted by us being surrounded by freeways. And you probably have heard through news outlets before that there's been conversations of having expansions of freeways near these communities as well, which we have resisted over the past decade with SANDAG. And this tool right here that you're looking at, CalEnviroScreen, it's a tool that anybody could use, and state legislators and county and even city legislators are using to prioritize funding and also to use for, somewhat like, for instance, the Port of San Diego at times uses this same tool to be able to apply for federal funds as well, for federal grants and whatnot. But this is a cumulative, we're talking about the cumulative impacts of environmental risk, exposure, social and health vulnerability. And of course, our communities top at the 15 percentile. Barrio, Logan, for instance, is in the top 5% most polluted communities in the state of California. And it's definitely one of the frontline communities in facing environmental injustice. Barrio Logan, of course, has one of the highest rates of asthma at the county level, 3 to 5 times the county rate. So I myself, doing healthy home visits, I was able to see this pretty often, and it causes really a lot of pain in the family. Parents can't go to work, kids don't go to school. One of the Perkins Elementary, one of the elementary schools in Barrio Logan, for instance, has the highest rates of asthma in the school district, and that impacts, you know, teachers. It impacts everybody. So it impacts an entire community. And then by zip code, you can see again through this heat map the hospital rates, ER rates per year. In 2015, this is what we're looking at. And so it's pretty evident that, you know, when you have the accumulation of toxic, you know, pollution in the air being emitted through the air, you have lead exposure and different forms of toxic exposure in general, that, you know, people face the consequences of that. And right now, this is actually a pretty recent map that got created by SANDAG. For those of you who don't know who SANDAG is a San Diego Association of Governments. I think of them as the United Nations of the county that manage billions of dollars in our county that go into housing, health services, freeways, and so forth. This is if you look at the unemployment rates on your left, you'll see the concentration of where the highest unemployment is happening. But we know that a lot of these families as well are having to deal with their kids being at home now, are having to deal with the fact that there are multiple people living in a house. There's 6 to 8. Most people are working 2 side jobs. So they, of course, COVID cases go hand in hand because they can't afford to work from home. A majority of these folks who live in our communities. So this all sort of puts it in perspective when it comes to who are the most vulnerable communities in our neighborhoods. What have we been doing to to find solutions to all of this. Well, I'll talk about a bit about Assembly Bill 617, Assembly Bill 617 that created the California's Act California Air Protection Program. And we launched a campaign at EAC to really start monitoring the air quality outside of people's homes and inside. We were providing them air filters, some of the most advanced IQ air indoor air filters that are able to filtrate and filter out particulate matter. Particulate matter, for those of you who don't know, is ultrafine particles that essentially clog your oxygen levels in your blood and prevent you from breathing. So this is very, when we were monitoring, we were seeing really high numbers in some of these homes who don't have ventilation because windows are sealed, some windows don't work, doors don't work, you name it. Poverty is real, and when you really get up close, you start seeing how it impacts people's health. Why does community planning impact our health? Well, again, like I was saying, sometimes living and having to live adjacent to a mechanic shop, a body shop, it doesn't help with the situation as it is, right? So land use helps essentially classify and designate appropriate uses and properties. So in the ideal world, you would have an area where heavy industry and light industry lives, and then you would have a buffer zone, and then you would have residential. And that is very typical in our communities north of the 8 or more affluent communities per se, but that is not the case in these communities that live with outdated community plans. We talk about sensitive uses quite often, and these are parks, community centers, faith-based services, school educational services, daycare centers, and these were the areas we were doing air monitoring. I myself gave the assignment to myself to really build a relationship with some of these institutions and community centers, because this is where kids and families are spending most of their time. And again, these are very scarce in our neighborhoods, so people would essentially have to drive to get to some of these locations as well. Hazardous uses, these are pretty prevalent. While the other was there's a lot of scarcity in those, these are very prevalent in these neighborhoods. And in the 92113 zip code, which is Barrio, Logan Heights, there's more recycling centers than anywhere else in the county by zip code. And the Chicano Park is a testament of that movement. Back in 1978, they got the community plan updated from 1970 to 1978 that allowed recycling and junkyards to get out of there. Hence the mural that's very famous there called Barrio sí, Yunques no, communities yes, junkyards no. So of course, toxic form of exposure comes from inhaling, in the skin, consuming. There are numerous ways that people can come in contact with these affected by, and be affected by these. So yeah, the health effects of pollution is something that is very notorious in our communities. And right now with COVID-19, and if you add this to the equation, well, a lot of people might not be able to even go to work. So it's been pretty impactful in our neighborhoods. And of course, when we talk about air quality and how particulate matter affects the brain and our bodies, we know that it increases asthma attacks, like I mentioned already, aggravates bronchitis, any form of allergy, for instance, too. It slows lung growth in children, lower birth weight, increased number of premature births contributes to premature deaths. Again, this all goes back to that first slide I showed you guys, where you live does matter. Your zip code does determine how long you live. And for us, I think the solutions, community well health and wellness lies on these main elements in our community: access to healthy foods, medical services, access to public transit. These are all the main things we've been advocating, at a community level. But it gives you a good idea of how broad the work that we do at a local and county level. At a state level, we're also part of the climate change solution. We have been trying to really push for public transportation and not necessarily increasing more or expanding freeways. So that's been our position. We know that natural gas, as good as it sounds, it's not as good as having zero emission vehicles, and finding electric sources out there that are available. Right now we're working with electrifying trucks at the county level, with specifically regarding trucks that are doing short trips, right, 200-mile trips. There is funding now available that some of these companies and industries could apply for. We also have issues with solid waste and wastewater, as I mentioned before. These are large recycling centers that have a concentration in our communities and are emitting toxic pollution as well. Back in 2018, EAC launched Start Here, Start Now report, which essentially was a report card of the climate action plan that got implemented back in 2016. And we were looking at the actual numbers, the data that was available, how much of these investments were put in communities that are at the front lines of climate change and environmental injustice. And there was all these question marks that we put in our reports, right? Because we haven't seen really an investment in our neighborhood specifically. So even though we were the ones that pushed for the climate action plan to get adopted in the city of San Diego, it has yet to be implemented. And a part of the work we do at EAC is not only create policy, but assure that the implementation happens. And sometimes that takes a decade, sometimes that takes 2 decades, believe it or not, it takes time. So Barrio Logan is a community like National City and City Heights where we work at, that some of these solutions are community-based oriented. So communities are the ones that are the architects of some of these solutions, and they prioritize and they envision what these community-based solutions could look like in neighborhoods. Barrio Logan, like I said, has the oldest community land use plan, and as a result, you still have industries like Praxair, which I had mentioned earlier, that's next to some residential homes and apartment complexes. In St. Louis in 2016, I believe it was a year, this similar facility in a similar location exploded, and you can only imagine what it cost the neighborhoods around. So one of the community-based solutions that we started approaching was in 2015, EAC passed a truck route resolution. However, trucks were still not obeying it. There was just signs. It was just in theory. Conceptually, it was a great idea, but they weren't following it. When I came into EAC in 2016, this was the issue I focused in because it was something that was impacting communities. It is both noise, air pollution, and even visual pollution, right? Some of these trucks idle in people's neighborhoods, and we're talking about 600 diesel trucks of 5-10 tons that go by these neighborhoods on a given day. So within a couple hours, in fact, when we were doing these truck studies or truck evaluations by neighborhood, we were in this particular area where we were focused in Boston Avenue, we were documenting anywhere from 40 to 60 diesel trucks going by. It happens to be that there was an on-ramp near your house. So all that to say that in December 2018, we passed the City of San Diego's first truck ordinance, which brought more teeth into that resolution that I passed earlier. And again, this was community's demands. So we launched a petition, and then we were able to create a truck ordinance and working with the local San Diego Police Department to enforce the truck route. Truck route enforcement is not what we really need in these neighborhoods. Because essentially the neighborhoods weren't designed for residents. They were designed for industry and the good movement to come in and out of these neighborhoods. Some of the main arteries, which takes trucks to the freeway, happen to go through neighborhoods like I was just mentioning. So I was involved really, a lot of my time went into this project alone. We were looking at how a local high school was near a truck route, and we were trying to create a green area, green space, and create street measures, calming measures, or street road diets, as they call them, to discourage trucks from coming. So like putting roundabouts and whatnot. This is an ongoing project that's still pending. Right now, I think we recently were able to get permission from Caltrans and that the parcels that you see below will be granted to the city to eventually create a green space. Barrio Logan has one of the largest green deficits, more so than any other community. Currently, it should be at about 12 acres. It's at 7 acres, and that's like most of Chicano Park. It's 6.5 acres, Chicano Park. So there's a lack of green space, and not only public safety is another issue why people don't use green space. So that adds to why obesity is very prevalent in our neighborhoods. There's lack of green space. Public safety is an issue, and these communities and streets were not designed for people to go out and about and exercise, right? When you have trucks and diesel trucks going in day and night, and you've seen some of the news stories already of trucks crashing into people's homes and blowing up. That has been the case in the past. some of the things that we've passed at a state level. So the Environmental Health Coalition is part of a statewide coalition called CEJA, California Environmental Justice Alliance, conformed of 12 sister organizations doing similar work like us, both at the community organizing and advocacy level. AB 617 was a huge bill that we were able to pass with our partners throughout the state, called the Community Air Protection Program, that essentially brings in more funding from cap and trade. For those of you who don't know it, it's like the stock market for those emitting and polluting air emissions and to our whole state. And they have to pay the price, and some of that funding is now allocated to this program called Community Air Protection Program, that essentially provides new community-focused action exposure to create criteria of air pollutants and toxic air contaminants in communities most impacted. So essentially finding what hotspots these are, and then bringing in funding to electrify some of this diesel equipment that is used at the port level, that is used by large companies who have to move their goods with diesel trucks. And so there's now more funding to either bring in newer vehicles and also to electrify some of these vehicles as well. AB 423 is one of the most recent bills we recently passed here at the county level that went through legislation, and eventually Todd Gloria, who's an assembly member, was able to get it out of the Senate. It's essentially, it's going to reform our air pollution control district, which some of you, when you look up the weather channel, what's the weather like in San Diego, where there used to be only 6 monitors, and there used to be like more of the affluent communities north of the 8. So our air quality was always pretty good. But yet we knew that Barrio, Logan, and National City residents' air quality was in the same story. So we've been really looking at ways that the air pollution control district could be restructured in ways that we can bring more visibility, more transparency to our local APCD. And I think one of the main things to mention about this is that this board in particular, the board that will now oversee, there wasn't a board before that will oversee APCD, will include a one justice, environmental justice community seat. So we'll have health experts, we'll have someone with an environmental justice background who will be able to take a seat and form part of this board that will be overseeing APCD. And for more recent news, APCD, because of that AB 423 bill that we passed, we were able to, that resulted also in an audit of the county. And we learned more recently, this is recent news, that $4 million were misused and were not being used properly. And this funding could have definitely gone into programs to reduce air pollution through our region. So again, these are agencies that we pay taxes for, we put our money in, and it's not coming to the most needed communities. And recently, again, like I mentioned before, the Navy ship that went on fire, the Navy kept saying there was nothing toxic in the air that was affecting our neighborhoods and our community residents, yet we know that people were having eye itches, people were having coughing problems, people couldn't sleep. And so it happened on Sunday, and it took 2 to 3 days for an advisory to go out and people to get text alerts and email alerts and call alerts 3 days after the fact. So we've learned that the county wasn't ready, the local APCD wasn't ready for this, and there's a lot of infrastructure to build around this. You can read more about both of these stories on our media center on our website, environmentalhealth.org, so please take a look. Our United to Vote campaign is coming. You might be asking yourselves, what can I do? How can I be a part of it? Through our United to Vote, we educate our communities about important ballot measures that are coming in every election cycle. So this is a good way to volunteer for the work we do. Learn about these environmental justice measures that are coming at the state level, both locally at the county and state level. So I highly recommend for those of you who want to donate 2 or 4 hours to come and be part of our annual trainings that we do. We do free trainings that anybody can join, and where you can learn more about the voter work we do and how to get the word out. So that's going to be coming up in late September, early October. And then last, here's the invitation I wanted to make sure you all had. Take a screenshot or take a cell phone shot of this. It's going to be on August 20th. We're going to have a very key, important guest speaker from the East Coast at the front lines of Native American environmental injustice work and climate justice as well. So please stop by and visit. This is August 20th. It's free. Usually you have to pay to go to this physical event, but because of COVID, we're doing it free online. So it's going to be a very unique event where we're going to be showcasing a lot of the victories, pictures, taking you back 40 years from now. Last, I want to thank you guys for being patient with me, and I hope you guys enjoy the presentation. Any questions you might have, please feel free to email me at my contact below. I think that cell phone is already outdated, but go ahead and email me at jorgeg@environmentalhealth, jorgeg@environmentalhealth.org if you guys have any more questions or want to learn more about how to volunteer or intern in the future. I'm happy to help you guys and connect you to the right people. And also follow us on Facebook and Instagram if you haven't done so. And anything related to environmental justice, our hashtag is IMEJ. I am environmental justice. Thanks again.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I know we have a couple of questions that have come in already. As a reminder to the audience members, if you have any additional questions, feel free to submit them directly to me, or you can post it in the chat for everyone to read. I think there was one point that Elizabeth had wanted to learn more about. You had mentioned that there's a community in City Heights that is impacted by environmental racism. Could you share a little bit more about why that community is more impacted? It seems a little less intuitive than being, portside like communities in Barrio, Logan, and National City.
Most definitely. I think one key thing here to keep in mind is diversity. City Heights in particular is a neighborhood where I live, but also has historically one of the highest concentration of immigration, migrant groups, refugee groups. And so it's always been an enclave, and yet the representation both at the planning groups, previous council members didn't really reflect the demographics of this neighborhood. It wasn't a district, so now it's part of District 9, but before it was not, it didn't have its own community voice and its own representation. And so we have that as a big key issue to racial inequality, that it took years for a community to really finally be heard, and said that we needed to be, City Heights needed to be in its own council district. So representation has been key. City Heights finally elected its first Latina and queer woman, who's now the council president of the city of San Diego. So that's huge. That's a huge victory, but that took years, right? Years of organizational work. One of the biggest, I think, impacts that split this community, like it also had split Logan Heights and Barrio Logan, was the creation of the 15th freeway. This really impacted the community, and there was a lot of promises that was going to come in, that were supposed to come in as a result of building the freeway, that didn't happen. For instance, affordable housing, more parks and recreational centers. All of this was a promise to the neighborhoods and didn't come through, and we're finally seeing some of that, simply because City Heights does count with a lot of nonprofit organizations doing similar work like us, and who's also with communities in the front lines. So diversity is very key when we talk about communities like City Heights that are also facing gentrification. This is definitely one of the communities in the front lines of that issue as well. Very few pop and mom shops, especially right now with COVID. A lot of them are closing down. More Starbucks. There's like 2 Starbucks within a block of within 2 blocks radius, and that's concerning. And again, we need to look at sustainable solutions in neighborhoods like City Heights that also lacks green space, that also lacks more representation. And planning groups are a good place to do it. We at the Environmental Health Coalition are constantly developing leaders and with the hope that they assume some of these seats and some of these positions so that they can voice their concerns. When I was doing criminal justice work here in City Heights, another key issue was it was embarrassing to say that the entire police division in City Heights only had 2 bilingual speakers in Spanish. And that there was never funding for community relations officers to speak other languages, such as Somalian or Vietnamese. So yeah, that was something that that opened my eyes when we talk about representation and how do you want community-based policing when you don't have police officers that speak and look like the people that live here. So that's a key issue that needs to be addressed. And I know some of that's happening now with the Citizenship Review Board now that's going to be overseeing the police department. I believe that's going to be a measure be put in the November ballot. So keep an eye out for that.
Speaking of that, are there particular policies or other programs that are under review today that a group of concerned environmentalists could really put their support behind to make a more impactful change?
Can you rephrase the question again? Sorry.
I'm curious to see if there are specific policies that are getting approved right now or other programs that are being developed that we could really support to create a more equitable future.
Most definitely. I think the biggest one, and I think this also is could be said for the previous question you had asked. One of them was there was going to be an MTS ballot measure that was going to come in November, and because of COVID, it was not no longer feasible, and so they decided to pull back. There was a whole campaign that took 2 years to make. Public transportation is a big deal in communities like City Heights. Why? Because there's a big, I think it's like 25-30% of residents here in City Heights who are renters don't have a car or a vehicle. So transportation has been a big issue, and I can't, like, some of the busiest MTS bus lines run through this neighborhood, like the 10 and the 11. These are very busy bus lines here in City Heights, and that could use more buses. And in fact, one of the things that we at EAC have been pushing for, that these communities should be the first ones to be obtaining some of these electric bus vehicles. As of now, I think there's 5 MTS buses in the region of San Diego. But we would have wanted to see, I think, at EAC an increment of these, a plan on how these electric buses were going to come into our communities first, right? That hasn't been recognized, for instance. It's been talked about theoretically, they're coming, and by 2040, a majority of the fleet at MTS will be electric. But these communities need to be the first ones to be prioritized, in communities like Barrio, Logan, and National City. That also, that in their case, in National City and Barrio, Logan, having the blue line trolley, the most transited line, I believe one of the most transited trolley lines on the whole country, they need an expansion of that. And that's been addressed for years and nothing has been done. We also recently passed a bill called AB 805 that created a board at MTS that has better representation and more transparency and more, and there's more accountability there, where people can actually come into one of these meetings and give public comment. So this is the board that eventually was putting together this potential ballot measure that didn't go through. So what we're hoping is that we reassess, because of COVID, we reassess what is it going to take to get these communities to be prioritized when it comes to public transportation. We know that there's a desperate need for that. The other one is food access. We don't have organic food markets here. Like, if you want to get organic food, you would have to go to North Park or Normal Heights. You would have to drive there. So access to food is huge. There is a lot of community farms, community gardens, but not enough, right? So green space is a key issue. Access to food is a big issue. Public transportation is a big issue. And a lot of these are either some of these solutions come through city budgets. So making sure when the time comes, which is around April, May, when city budgets get put together, that we have community advocacy addressing this, that we need it. We often put petitions together, which you all could eventually help and support to be able to eventually, that could lead us into a ballot measure itself. So yeah, I think the MTS ballot measure is what was definitely one that was cooking in the oven for a while, and unfortunately, because of COVID, didn't make it through. However, the conversation continues, and we will continue to push on that issue in particular.
Fantastic. There are a couple of questions around the climate action plan. One, which I think is maybe a little quicker to address, but where can we find that report associated with the climate action plan?
If you go to our website, there's a search option there. And I believe there should be some sort of hyperlink with a PDF that will take you there. And if you don't find it for some reason, just email me, Jorge G at Environmental Health, and I can forward that to you guys. That was a public, we actually had a press conference when we released it, and it was a big deal. But again, we had the support of Assembly Member Todd Gloria and of course, Council President Jorge Gomez, because this is something that, you know, the mayor has a lot of power, has a lot of influence. That we were able to finally, through a city budget, obtain someone, a staffer, who now oversees the climate action plan implementation. That wasn't the case until last year. And that only happened because communities pushed for that. Because there's one thing, theoretically, it sounded good when it happened in 2016, and the mayor took a lot of pride in that, but we haven't seen that implementation happening in our communities.
Perfect. And on a related comment plus question, when a city is developing a climate action plan, the end of the line often seems to be how much greenhouse gas emissions can we save versus how much would that actually cost. So do you have suggestions on ways that we can integrate these principles of environmental justice into specific climate action plan goals? Maybe there's a specific example of how San Diego's current climate action plan is failing in this regard.
Yeah, you made me think of one immediately. Right now, there's a GIS system that the city has created. You can find it on their website, where they can find where the need for green canopy could come in. This is huge because, you know, in our communities, not only public safety is an issue because of, you know, we have we don't have lighting in some of these, you know, key corridors in our neighborhoods, but also in summer times when it gets really hot, families want to take a walk in their neighborhoods because we don't, essentially, a lot of these neighborhoods don't count with parks. We don't have tree canopy, so it gets pretty hot. So the city of San Diego did a good job in putting together this GIS tool that is great and fundamental, but if it doesn't get used to prioritize environmental justice communities, we don't see the benefit, right, to that tool alone. And so green canopy is crucial because it does reduce carbon emissions. We know that trees alone do help us with carbon sequestration. So filter out, you know, toxic, you know, air and emits us, you know, good quality air. So trees are important, you know, without a doubt. There are some sort of vacuums or filters out there, you know, filters. So it's important to have these trees out there in the urban forestry department in the city. It was unbelievable when I was doing the research. There was only one employee behind. They had acquired 10,000 trees, and they were they had called us to figure out where to place them. But then the concern the issue was that they would place them with the consent that the homeowner who would have to live in front of this tree, or whose tree would be located in front of their house, they would have to water it for the next 2 years. So a lot of folks don't have the time for that. A lot of folks can't pay that extra water bill for that. So it was very problematic. So again, the climate action plan is something that I think we continue to work on. Right now, similar to the Cal EnviroScreen tool that we've been using, something similar is coming to the city to prioritize funding. That didn't exist in the city. Our recommendation was use the Cal EnviroScreen. They didn't want to use the Cal EnviroScreen for some reason. They wanted to create their own version, using this GIS tool that they've already created, for instance, to figure out where trees should come in. So we've been in the negotiation process with them and providing them feedback and giving a lot of input. But again, when you have one staffer overseeing this could take another 5 years, and that position is not even guaranteed. So there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of work to be addressed, but again, it takes raising the awareness, and hence why I'm here, and I'm happy to be able to share this type of information with you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, and thank you to Elizabeth for sharing that link. Going back to something you had mentioned earlier, we had a question around equitable distribution of food and access to healthy foods. Can you speak a little bit more to any current programs underway or initiatives that are being proposed to have a more equitable food system?
I guess currently there isn't an organization that's really carrying a lot of that work. And I think largely having to do with parcels. When we talk about land use and what's out there available, gentrification has been underway in the past 2 decades, for sure. You know, and a lot of these parcels have been acquired by developers who sometimes live in Chicago, real estate agencies that are in New York. Um, and then some of the sites that are owned by the city are polluted, are toxic, so they're brownfields to some degree. So there is that element to it. Some of the grocery stores, some of the bigger ones, right, that can bring, that are the ones that are usually carry organic produce or local produce, don't want to come to these neighborhoods. It took years to bring some of the ones we have currently, right, that are not unionized. We see that in City Heights with El Super. We see that in Barrio Logan with Mercado Northgate. These supermarkets are tailoring to our neighborhoods, but we know that they're not looking for the health and wealth of our community. Essentially, we do. There's a lot of CSA programs. I think that is something that I think has taken off in the past 10 years in City Heights in particular. We have a community. There's a farmers market in City Heights, and yet, it was mainly tailoring and being supported by refugee and immigrant families who were growing their own food with the support of the IRC, Immigrant Rescue Commission. I believe that's what it stands for, the abbreviation there. So they work with mainly refugee communities, and they're also helping teach the next generation of youth to work with crops and growing their own food. That was a huge. That's a huge. I guess campaign. It's an ongoing, issue in our neighborhoods where there's food scarcity. There's some areas in City Heights that are food deserts, that the only food access they have is that local liquor store. And again, you have to think about families who don't have a car, who work 2 jobs, who are busy to go to Vaughn's or go to Rouse, where as it is, it's already 3-4 times more expensive. So some of the community gardens that are out here are setting the model of what it could look like if there were to be more land accessible and available. And I know this impacts the future generations. I know Mid City Camp, for instance, a nonprofit here in City Heights, worked on changing the food policy at the local high school to bring more food diversity into the food meals, instead of pizzas, hot dogs, to bring food that would be tailored to Somalian communities, Muslim communities, and Vietnamese communities. And that was a policy that took place at the school district. So there's different layers to the issue. I think raising the awareness is an ongoing thing that we at EEC are very much focused in, and that Here to Stay, a report that we put out there. We did a whole study on the food diversity in our communities, and how food access is also something that needs to be measured and needs to be looked at in order to bring more investment, locate that city land use that could be turned into a community garden, that could be turned into an ideal food market for the neighborhood.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for providing that insight into the challenges that these communities face. And Jen did note in the chat that the San Diego Food Systems Alliance is doing some work to support food justice within the county. And a quick note for any interested attendees is that they are currently seeking public comment on their Food Vision 2030, which is an initiative looking ahead 10 years to make these food systems more equitable. So happy to share that link in a minute for anyone who's interested and wants to learn more. I know that we're just about at our time for questions. So maybe to wrap it up, could you provide any insights or tips for an environmentalist who is looking to better get involved in the environmental justice movement, and to find those ways to support and advocate and center the individuals who have been fighting this fight?
Definitely. Well, one is being able to not only stay in tune with the work we're doing, because if you don't hear from us, you might not hear from other news outlets, right? So it is important for folks like you all to share sometimes the news stories that we put out there through our Facebook, through our social media. Also, we often put out calls to action. So if you're part of our listserv, you'll receive an invitation to fill out some form of petition. Uh, those are very fundamental. We sometimes print them out. We take them to the Port of San Diego's public hearings. We take them to SANDAG's public hearings, NTS public hearings, and numbers, organized numbers, organized data brings us positive results, right? That has been the case before, and it always brings us a good victory. Sometimes there's disappointments, but for the most part, it helps us build that power. Another way, of course, is we always say if you can donate $5 to the organization, that could be another way you can support the organization. Become a member by donating $5 a month. If that's something you could do. If you're not someone who's not going to be filling out petition or not stay on top of it, we were previous to COVID, we would be our meetings were we provided food, we provided childcare for families, and that alleviated a lot of the stress of families, or that barrier families having to come to meetings to get informed. The other way, I think I already mentioned it, was our voter campaign. We definitely are looking into having 2 volunteer days. We hope to have your support. We're realizing that a lot of the 18 to 35 age groups are one of the 40%, make up 40% of the voters in these communities, and yet they have the lowest turnout when it comes to voting. And we're talking about these communities in particular are voting at 15 to 25%. And these are only the folks that are registered to vote. There's another huge percentage of folks who could be registered to vote and that aren't. So yeah, I think this time around, as you probably have already heard, people will be able to vote by mail. So permanent voter by mail will be an option by default now for the upcoming election. A lot of families that we work with don't know what that is about. It's already hard, and we're trying to change the culture of getting them out to vote. So more than ever, I think we need your support when it comes to our voter campaign. So please follow up with me, follow up on our website. There'll be volunteer opportunities with that. And from the comfort of your home, you're going to be able to support what we're doing. And you will also be part of a training that we're going to conduct called SALTA, Salud Ambiental y Tomando Acción. So it's essentially a training institute of environmental justice leaders taking action. And this is where we invite residents, volunteers to learn about the work we do up close, and also a way to get closer to the organization, get to see the faces behind EAC, and an opportunity to learn about local, county, and state ballot measures that you might not be informed otherwise. So please reach out, stay in touch, share those Facebook or Instagram, whatever your social media or form of communication is, email, whatever. Just follow us one way or another and try to share that information, because if we don't hear it through us, a lot of the times news outlets don't really tell our story. So it's important for our narrative to be told, and for people to be raising the awareness of what's at stake.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I hope that all of you have been inspired and at least learned a thing or two tonight. I know I did. What we're going to do next is do a quick round of applause for our speaker. I know virtual, it looks a little bit different, but thank you so much for joining us and making the time.